So I want to stress the last group, but I also want to say not blame. Don't blame these people for what I'm about to tell you. Because honestly, and as I think I'll make clear at the end, this is my reaction to what I learned here. And I think I do have a real benefit coming from the outside and not being mired in it and applying much more general, kind of universal and also international principles of good planning to the circumstances. But actually, my stance, which to me feels perfectly rational, is more radical than anyone else I met. So don't blame them. I want to apologize in a sense to the Make I-45 Better Coalition, to all the people who've been working on this, because a ton of work has been done. So on the left here, you see all the folks in that 21-member coalition and then a bunch of folks who they're working with. And they've created this book, which includes, well, this is a separate document, but the Impacts and Solutions Action Plan. I'm going to read it to you now. Just kidding. It's all this. But they did all this work, right? All these pages, and I'm kind of throwing it out. And I apologize to them. So here's what I don't have time to tell you. First, that I-45 will wreck your bayou parks, that it will destroy your wildlife habitat, that it will make flooding worse, that it will impede neighborhood connectivity and access, that it will reduce city revenues, that its bike facilities are a cruel joke, and that the caps are not likely to be successful, and that I-45 is so much money. So, sorry, don't clap. So, I don't have time to tell you that I-45 will do this to this and do this to this. I don't have time to tell you about these poor birds who are having, what's the reverse? Having this done to them. I don't have time to tell you that it will make flooding worse, but I can tell you that it's making flooding worse because it's being designed to a 100-year floodplain. The 100-year floodplain. We all know now that the 100-year flood in Houston is last week's flood, and that the county is using the 500-year floodplain, but currently TxDOT is not. So that means if they mitigate the current condition based on the floodplain, which we know is no longer valid, there will be more flooding than there currently is in places like Independence Heights, the first independently, incorporated black community in Texas. It will impede neighborhood connectivity and access. There's a caveat to this, which I'll share, and some positive things, but there will be reduced connectivity. The Jensen ramp is being removed. I think the North Main ramp is being half removed. The North Street Bridge that connects two neighborhoods is being removed. So these are all ways to get around locally that will now be impeded by the highway. And then there's going to be cut-through traffic because these connections are snipped. A lot of people are going to be driving through the neighborhoods, especially as Waze directs them to. The access roads are going to be moved from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, which means they'll go from 45 miles an hour to 55 miles an hour actual driving speeds as TxDOT predicts, so they'll be much harder to cross. And then the overpasses are going to get a lot wider, right? So a typical overpass you see in the top of this image becomes the one below it, right? The black and white becomes the color. It's one thing to walk under 10 lanes, it's another to walk under 30 lanes of traffic. I think that one's actually 20 lanes. 2 key exceptions that people are kind of excited about that aren't so bad could be very positive for Houston. One is the Pierce Elevated and the other is the convention deck. The proposal involves taking this down or turning it into a linear park a la Highline without, of course, the nuisance of the cars going overhead, which would make it a more of an urban amenity. That's definitely a positive thing. Connecting these 2 parts of downtown Houston together will be a good thing for Houston. The question is at what cost? But this is the sort of thing that cities are doing, either with replacing, like you saw in the Big Dig in Boston, right, or in Oklahoma City, they take down highways and they replace the capacity elsewhere, or in other places, also successfully, they take the capacity away and they don't replace it. Like at the Embarcadero Freeway in San Francisco, the West Side Highway in New York City, the Changye-Chen massive 400,000 car per day freeway in Seoul, South Korea came down, not replaced, and there was no traffic problem. So that's another alternative we could think about. But this coming down is a good thing. knitting these two neighborhoods together. Also, the deck that's proposed for alongside, between these two neighborhoods is a good thing for knitting these neighborhoods together. So those are positives. I-45 will reduce city revenues. The predicted businesses that are lost based on being displaced by the highway are expected to be a loss of $134 million a year in revenues to the city. Property taxes and mostly sales taxes. So that's an issue I don't have time to tell you about. I-45's bike facilities are a cruel joke, especially in 2019 when we know so much better. And if you can see this image, the smaller above is the existing right-of-way, below is the proposed right-of-way, and somehow in a $7+ billion facility, the bikes still don't get their own way. And they're expected to share that outer access lane. There's 3 access lanes there. The outer one is 15 feet wide, 55-mile-an-hour expected speed of these cars, which means that no one's going to bike on it, or those people that do bike on it will be extremely endangered at that speed, and probably able to have Shero markings on it, which we now know don't do anything. In fact, we've invented a new symbol to replace the Shero that we call the Prero, but they actually make streets less safe. So I don't have time to tell you more about that. Now, these caps are a great idea and beautiful concept to have nature on this cap, but the model we're being shown that everyone loves is the Clyde Warren Park in Dallas, which is a bit of a fluke, as you know, but it was extraordinarily expensive. It was essentially $20 million per acre, but only half of that was the park, the other half was the cap. So if we were to apply that to this site, which is 30 acres, it's a $300 million park. In Clyde Warren, I call it a fluke because it's Dallas. It's named after a living kid. His dad named it after him, and he's still alive, and he goes there. And, so just, Mr. Warren, call your office because we need $300 million more. I'm just not optimistic, nor is anyone I spoke to, about the private fundraising that would be possible to make this actually happen and not just be a wasteland of asphalt or concrete. And then finally, I-45 is so much money. Just look at this. This is one of the biggest highways in the world with all these loops and swerves and how'd that get in there? But it's this huge investment. We hear $7 billion to $10 billion, and of course it could get higher. These things usually do. Trump only wants $5 billion for his wall, right? And that would have paid for 1.4 million Americans to get Medicare. So all of Houston, right, 2.4, could get it for the price of this highway. Or if you take Bernie Sanders' college plan and you apply it, its funding, and you divide that over the population of Houston, it turns out that you can basically give free college to all of Houston for 30 years if you don't build this highway. So I just want you to realize how much money that is. And is that the best use? Is this the best use of that money? So I didn't have time to really tell you about any of those things, but those are them. What I do have time to tell you, these are, I think, the main points I want to stress. I'm going to talk about how I-45 is a huge investment in the driving economy, how driving is the least sustainable thing that we do, how highway building is bad for cities, how it adds lanes to fix congestion, but adding lanes does not fix congestion. It's justified by safety, but I'm confident it will increase driving deaths for reasons I will explain. It's justified by air quality, but I'm confident it will worsen air quality, as every similar project always has. And it will eliminate jobs, displace thousands, and tear communities apart. So it's a huge investment in the driving economy, $7 to $10 billion. Bruce Katz lectured here, and he talks about whether cities like Pittsburgh are investing in innovation or whether they're investing in consumption. For every Pittsburgh, there are dozens of cities subsidizing consumption rather than investing in innovation. And of course, the most consumptive thing we do is drive our cars. That's what the driving economy is. It's a consumption economy. And it's an economy in which most of the money goes elsewhere. Now, in Houston, you can't say that as much as in other cities because you get a lot of the money in Houston. But the principle, most of the money even that you spend is leaving your local economy and going elsewhere. And this is what you're investing in. Driving is the least sustainable thing that we do, there's no doubt. And in Walkable City, I talked about the three ways in which we were building an unsustainable society around driving. The economic, environmental, and health reasons why a community that's more based on transit and walking is more sustainable than a community that's based on driving. And in a very quick nutshell, the economic argument goes like this. In 1970, we Americans spent 10% of our income on transportation. But in the ensuing 40 years, we doubled the number of roads in our country, and we essentially doubled the amount of our income that we spend on transportation. So now we spend 20% of our income on transportation. And that's the cost to us of having tied ourselves to this extremely expensive and inefficient way to move around, which you just saw. So the personal cost is huge. In fact, if you're a poor American, quote unquote, you're spending 40% of your income on transportation, and considerably more than on housing. There's also the societal issue, though. It's not just the individuals, it's the society as a whole. How much are you being subsidized by your society when you choose a mode of transport? And this includes indirect things like policing and ambulances and time wasted. But if walking costs you $1, I don't know how it would, but perhaps shoes, society invests a penny in that. For every dollar you spend biking, society spends 8 cents. Yes, busing is subsidized, $1.50 on the dollar, but driving is, and this is an old estimate, but driving is estimated to be $9 of social contribution to the dollar you spend to drive, which is actually why we drive so much. It's what economists call a free good. You do not pay what it really costs, and therefore it's really smart to do it as much as you can, but also the cost to society is huge. The environmental story you know very well, you know all too well here in Houston. You create and suffer from climate change here. And the story of this map that you can draw for any American city is that when you're in the center, this is carbon footprint per household. When you're in the center, taking transit, walking, biking, living more compactly, you generate much less carbon than if you're in the exurbs and the very kind of parts of the city that are enabled and served by the roadways and not these other modes of transportation. And here you are at the top of this chart. Urban density and transport-related energy. So energy also equals carbon, right? So you to get around, you happen to be less dense. This is a little bit unfair because you're very big. You include a lot of your suburbs. So cities that include their suburbs are a lot less dense than cities that don't, right? If Boston included its suburbs, it would be higher up this chart. But your suburbs are part of the city of Houston. So it's a little bit unfair, but let's turn to what really matters, which is that you are producing more carbon per person because of the way that you've spread out around highways. So you're the worst. And you benefit from that with your oil extraction economy, but we all know that that is temporary, and you need to do your best for all of us to get further down this chart. Now, in all fairness, there are smaller cities that are worse that we'll learn about in a little bit. And then finally, the health discussion. We've all heard it. I always say the best day to be a planner was August 7th, 2004, when this book came out. And these doctors, these epidemiologists said, the reason why we have the first generation of American kids who are expected to live shorter lives than their parents is because we've designed out of our society the useful walk. And we have an inactive culture. That inactivity makes us heavier, makes us sicker. The burdens in our society are tremendous. And I tell you, being in Beijing last week, I didn't see a single overweight person. I saw, one American in my restaurant. And you realize how our society has changed because we've embraced the automobile. And the studies are now very clear, not only linking driving to lack of health, but actually zip code based on how much driving is happening to the people who live in these zip codes is the principal determinant of how unhealthy they are. So, and then asthma, 14 Americans die from asthma every day, which may not be that bad, but it's 3 times what it was in the 1990s. And it's coming principally from car exhaust. The principal source of asthma particles in the US is not factories, it's tailpipes. And of course, it's unevenly distributed, particularly in Houston. And the poor people and the people of color are the ones who are living near the highways where all of this toxic, and factories, because you have those too, but also highways where this toxicity is being created. And car crashes. and being interviewed after an accident, like right after, which I'm going to talk about more later. But really the biggest health threat, if dying is considered health or lack thereof, to us all from driving is the accidents, the crashes. Sorry, we don't call them accidents. They're not an accident. They're designed into the roadway. They're crashes. Highway building is bad for cities. This is an amazing article that not many people know about that came out in 2004 by a Canadian planner, really a landscape architect, Patrick Condon. And he maps in it downtown property values of Canadian cities and American cities, and he maps them against highway miles per capita. And what you find in these maps, and I'm going to leave this up for a while so you can study it, what you find in these maps, this happens to be Portland, Oregon, is that when highways are being built, downtowns are not thriving. And when the pause in the highway building occurs, the downtowns start to do better. And then they decide to build some more highways, and the downtown starts struggling again. And there's an incredibly clear inverse correlation between highway investment and the value of your downtown. Highway investment is the quickest path to devaluing your inner city. And the reason for that is clear, and we've experienced it in American city after American city. When the highways came in to make it easy to get in and out of downtown, of course, it made it easy to get out of downtown. And a lot of people never came back, and they enabled the suburban lifestyle. As they said in Rochester, we built an evacuation route. It worked. Everybody evacuated. And they've now actually, they've dismantled that ring road around Rochester. So, next. I-45 adds lanes to fix congestion, but adding lanes does not fix congestion. Here are the materials produced by TxDOT. The benefits of the project. We're going to increase speeds by 20 miles an hour by eliminating congestion. We're going to reduce delay during peak hour. This time it'll work. Region-wide reduction in delay and increase to average speeds. This doesn't happen. It has never happened. Houston owns the poster child for how it never happens, called the Katy Freeway, and we'll talk about that. This is the chart I've shown before. I show it everywhere I go. We've been showing it for 25 years. This is ideal traffic planning. When the yellow line goes above, when the traffic goes above the capacity, you get congestion. So you broaden the road and you think that you will eliminate that congestion. But of course, there were a lot of trips that weren't happening because of congestion. And the operative sentence is, in congested systems, the principal constraint to driving is congestion. Because it's a free good, driving is a free good as I explained, you don't pay the full cost. The smart thing to do is to drive as much as possible. When that principal constraint goes away, you move further from your work, you stop carpooling, you stop taking transit, you commute exactly on peak, you make all these decisions, and the traffic comes back. And it keeps coming back, and you can keep widening, like the Katy, and it'll keep coming back. In the middle here, today's engineers acknowledge that building new roads usually makes traffic worse. Well, apparently not the engineers at TxDOT. Here is the study, The Fundamental Law of Highway Congestion, presented at the Paris School of Economics, very straightforward. Actually, I have no idea what this means, but I do know what this means, which is that immediately the capacity tends to be taken up by 40% new trips, and within 4 years it's 100% taken up. Sometimes it's immediately taken up, like the 405 expressway in LA was immediately taken up by more new trips than it had before it was widened. California's DOT is one of very few that admit that you will induce demand by building more lanes. And then there's the Katy Freeway, $2.8 billion, widest highway in the world, soon to be displaced in that status by I-45. Within 4 years, the morning commute was taking 30% longer, and the evening commute was taking 50% longer. And this is world famous. Articles all over the place, reducing congestion, Katy didn't. And then the experience, so that 4-year march up beyond the initial capacity. And the fellow among the traffic engineers, I'm surprised at how rapid the increase has been. Naturally, when you see an increase like that, you're going to have people make different decisions. Well, I'm waiting for those different decisions. And what we hear is, we're not building another Katy Freeway. That's the word you hear about this road. This is before, this is after. This is before, this is after. All right, I showed you this one before and after. It looks a lot like a Katy Freeway to me. But the difference is here, pictured in the middle, they're adding hut lanes, right? They're taking what's one hut lane and they're turning it into 4 hut lanes. So they are doing a smart thing on certain lanes and controlling access with tolling. The problem is they're new lanes, in addition to other new lanes. So, the solution, rather than building this whole huge thing on the bottom, an alternative solution would be simply to manage the lanes you have, right? Expand the 1 lane perhaps to 5 managed lanes, and you're done for a lot lower fee. We'll get more into that later. I-45 is justified by safety, but it will increase driving deaths. Why do I say that? Because look at these rates. Car deaths per year per 100,000 citizens. New York is 3.9 people. San Francisco is 4 people. Portland is 6.2 people. Houston is 12.9 people. Why? Oh, and by the way, that means you lose 813 people a year. If you were in New York, you'd lose only 246 people a year. So thanks to all your highways, you lose an extra 567 people per year. That's a bunch of planes falling out of the sky. Why do Houston's roads kill so many more people? Because the morbidity of a transportation system is a direct outcome of how much time people spend driving on highways. That's the risk to you. The more highways you have, the more time you spend driving on them. If you look city to city, that's how you understand the data that you discover, which is the more highways, the more deaths. So you are in this position because of all your highways. And the more time you spend on highways and the more highways you have to be on and the faster and wider your highways are, the higher up you will creep, right? You're already pretty, you might even reach Orlando at 18. But here's another thing. The justification that TxDOT gives is making curves safer, right? They're going to increase the design speed of the curves because the current curves of off-ramps and other things are a lower design speed that doesn't meet the current safety standard. So we're going to make it safer by making people go faster, okay? But in case that does make sense to you, here's another article just this week, February 26th from Strong Towns, a novel but still wrong argument for widening a freeway. This is the I-5 in Portland, which they did just that. They widened the lanes, they put in breakdown lanes, they did the sort of stuff that's being done to make this highway safer. And here's the funny thing, though. It says, we're not widening it to reduce congestion. We all know that doesn't work. Why don't we know it? Because of Houston's idiotic Katy Freeway. So that's not going to happen. All right, but let's look at the crash data. Let's compare the crash data. We've done it now. We've widened this street. Let's look at what happened. And of course, there's a period of a year or two where construction is happening, where there's a few more crashes. It goes up about, 30%. Then it settles in at about 20% higher than it was before. So again, this widening was done for no other reason than to improve safety for the exact same reasons that TxDOT is giving us for I-45, and it didn't. It made it worse. I-45 is justified by air quality, but it will worsen air quality. How can I say that? There's this illusion, and I shared it for a long time, when you're sitting in traffic and the exhaust is making the air waver, and you're just stuck in traffic and there's hundreds of cars all around you, you're like, this is destroying the planet. This must be the worst possible thing. And people tell us, if we reduce the congestion, we'll have freer flow and we will have less pollution. It turns out there's a strong correlation, this is from Walkable City. It turns out there's a strong correlation between metropolitan areas' average traffic speed and its fuel use. Cities with higher congestion use less fuel per capita, while cities with the least congestion use the most fuel. In other words, the less the congestion, the greater the carbon footprint, because people drive more. It's cars moving quickly that cause greenhouse gases, not as much as sitting still. The more highways miles per capita, the greater the carbon footprint, period. Look at city after city after city. Look at the carbon emissions. And here you are, third in the nation in roadway. You must need more because you're third, right? Roadway miles per capita. You're behind Kansas City and St. Louis, which are probably worse than you on that curve, but they're smaller, so they didn't make it into the chart, right? So you're not the worst, actually. But the reason why you are dying so much, the reason why you're polluting so much is because you have so many highways, so many more than the rest of us. Finally, I-45 will eliminate jobs, displace thousands, and tear communities apart. This is the hard part. This is what I got to witness yesterday. First of all, we know that this is TxDOT's own accounting. 331 businesses and 25,000 jobs will be eliminated, or at least have to find someplace else to go by this highway expansion. Here's the school that we visited, Bruce Elementary, in the kind of the curve. See the blue building in the curve of the highway, which is getting even closer to them. Lovely place, great kids. They're one of 24 schools and roughly 24 schools and a dozen daycares that are within 150 meters of this highway, in which many more cars will be traveling on, generating more greenhouse gases. 10% of these kids have asthma. Additionally, as we'll hear in a minute, 2/5 of them are having their homes destroyed and will need to find a way to get to this school from further away, or have to change schools and have their school community destroyed because their homes are being run over by the highway. As I suggested, 1,235 homes and roughly 5,000 people will be displaced by this highway. Now, you know, this is a nice house, looks new. It's in the path of the highway. These houses are in the path of the highway. You know, I visited the Delaney Street homes, which are in the path of the highway. And I want to back up a little bit. I spoke, and she's here, one of the owners made it very clear that the way that their homes are valued, based on what they paid for them and other stuff, the way that they'll be reimbursed by TxDOT is very unlikely to allow them to remain in the community, and in this particular case, in Houston. So there's some real question, certainly among the owners, a very strong doubt based on conversations with TxDOT that they'll be getting enough compensation to stay in their communities. You guys know this book? Probably one of the best books. The best book about how to plan is Jane Jacobs, right? Death and Life of Great American Cities. The best book about the history of planning is this book, Power Broker, Robert Caro. I've heard him speak. I'd read it all, and I still cried when I heard him tell the story, as everyone was crying, about all these families that were displaced in New York City by Robert Moses's roadway building. This is a very hard image to find, but I did find it, and I think it's still relevant. And it may not be fully relevant here in the sense that not everyone is black who's being run out, but it's definitely place-based, environmental injustice and inequity based on the people who live in the wealthy neighborhood who really aren't being touched, and what's happening in the other neighborhoods. And we have houses going, but we also have two churches going, two churches being flattened by the highway. And we met with this Pastor Johnson of one of them, the Greater Mount Olive Missionary Baptist, and he made it very clear, like the funding he's going to get to replace his church is enough for him to replace the church he's got, but the church he's got doesn't meet a parking requirement, doesn't meet a detention requirement, and if he's going to build a new church to replace this old church, he's going to have to pay twice as much, and that's not the money he's getting. So this 117-year-old congregation with parishioners who've been going there for 50 years or more is essentially, it's at death's door because of this highway. And there are other stories. So that is the whole list of what I did have time to tell you. Now for my conclusion. You really are facing two possible futures in Houston. You're doing so many great things, and I should acknowledge that at the beginning to predispose you to have listened to my talk. I forgot. But you're doing so many great things. You've got the Complete Communities effort. You've got this great tram that I've been riding for days. You probably aware, you reorganized your bus system and made it much more efficient. You've got the bike share. You've got the great effort around bayou planning and beyond the bayous that's happening, and great bike planning that's happening as well in the bayous. And then you have this. And this is, it's like Jekyll and Hyde, right? This is Dr. Jekyll, this is Mr. Hyde, and the TxDOT doing what TxDOT does, more roads. Oh, but with toll lanes, right? And the whole strategy is that the toll lanes somehow make this a different TxDOT and a different future. But it's not. It's the same future. It's the future that causes Amazon to not look at America's fourth largest city as a finalist for its headquarters. It's the future that is in the Mercer quality of life ranking. You know, Mercer looks at all the big cities in the world and ranks them in terms of 10 criteria that add up to a high quality of life: health, education, income, transportation, and a bunch of others. Here's the first 23. I think Toronto's on there, where, by the way, people drive 1/4 as much as in New York City, even. Eventually you get to some American cities: Boston, Honolulu, San Francisco, right, starting at number 30. You'll notice something that all these cities share, which is none of them have many highways. Vancouver, which always does very well, there it is at number 5, is the one big city in North America that highways never were let into, the one. And that's why Vancouver's always winning, because highways destroy quality of life. You guys are number 65. You're actually beating out 4 American cities that I won't name. But you're number 65 in that list, and we can do better than that. So I'm left with 2 questions. The first is, how did TechStock end up as your city planner? And I see Bill standing. Would you rather I finished up and we discussed that together, or do I have 5 more minutes? Go ahead. Okay. So I'm a city planner. I went to school for 1 million years. I go all over the world. I study cities. I recognize that there are successes and failures. There's a history of success and failure, of things that work in cities, things that don't work in cities, things that make cities prosperous and sustainable, and things that make cities fail. So all that goes into the work I do and my colleagues do when we have the opportunity to work on the planning of cities. The biggest planning decision in a generation is currently being made in Houston by TechStock, who aren't even asking the questions, right? They aren't asking, and by the way, they're all nice guys. They are. They're nice people. I heard some of them were invited. I hope they're here. I'm sure they're wonderful people. But good people sometimes do bad things. And TechStot has a mandate. And by the way, the head of the board of TechStot said in a publicly aired statement not that long ago, Texas is not a public transportation state. And that's the approach of TechStot, but it's the approach of all DOTs. Almost every DOT except California and maybe New England, a couple in New England, but they're road builders. And we can accept them as road builders, but that doesn't make them city planners. They've made this huge decision that's the biggest planning decision in a generation in your city, that they're going to build this road, because that's what they do. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And when you're a road builder, every opportunity is a road building opportunity. The problem isn't that they're doing what they do. The problem is that they're doing what I do, right? And not just me, I'm joking, but people who are city planners people who know that they're planning the city should be planning cities. Cities should not be being planned by people who don't even know that they're creating the future of that city. All they know is they're building roads to move more cars, because that's their mandate. That's the mandate that they're given. So the problem isn't that they're who they are. The problem is that they're given this role that's not appropriate. Next. Oh, I'm going backwards, sorry. Oh, so your decision-making model is wrong. Let's just say it's wrong. 2, what is the pathology that has led everyone to be so defeatist? Because I've come here, and what I'm hearing from everyone is pretty much that it's a done deal. Not that the details are done, but that, yes, there's going to be like a $7 to $10 billion highway capacity increase. And now we're just trying to make it better, right? We're trying to make it better. But that's very different from what you find in other places. And I haven't mentioned Dallas all night. And I actually prefer Houston to Dallas, as you probably all do, because it's better. But Dallas has stopped 1 and maybe 2 highways in the last 10 years. They killed the Trinity River Tollway, and I was hearing stories about, I don't know anything about it, but I'm hearing stories about something called 435, which they actually, after 2 elections, flipped the city council in order to stop, or at least delay. So you have other cities, not too far away, that understand that if people unite, It's not about, can we have one fewer lane or can we put a berm between us and the 30-lane highway? But can we stop this from happening? Now, there's some things in the plan that I've mentioned that are good, and there's some changes to the highway that need to happen. There's holes and things that might fall apart and things that need fixing. But I find it, I'm surprised, and I think the reason it's happened is that there's been this divide and conquer strategy, where TxDOT has talked to neighborhood after neighborhood individually, let people know they were getting the best deal that they could get and that the change was coming, and it's never been this big public event. But tonight we have a big public event, and there were people here with signs, and people care, and so I don't know how optimistic I can be, but I do feel like if some dramatic change is going to come out of people's fears, very, very well-justified fears about this highway, that maybe it could start tonight and you could choose your better future. So thank you for listening, and I hope I've convinced you.
Thank you.